You're welcome. That's not right. Okay. All of that. Right? It's a lot of things. Nice to get. Yes, nice to meet you as well.
Aaron, Evola's on. Mm-hmm.
Let's see first.
I stopped the video. I said I stopped the video.
Hello, hello.
They played against the Dallas side.
Good, yeah.
They're literally behind me. Like, I'm waiting.
Hello? We're going to give a couple more minutes for some subscribers. We've got a couple people call, getting logged into Zoom and getting everything organized. We probably have a good 50, 60 people on Zoom in addition to the people in here tonight. So a couple of things are going to go on real quickly. Before the panel discussion, we'll have Father Calendar give an opening prayer. And then after the event, we've got tables set up. The RRC has a lot of programs set up for this season, for this year. And so feel free to grab a water, some snacks, visit the tables, and you can find out what else is going on, what other programs that you can get involved in this year. So we'll give a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you.
And I'll start over by. We're going to go about an hour and work on
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out to the RRC event. We're really looking forward to it. Really appreciate everybody taking the time to be here tonight. We've got a great panel for you, a lot of discussions, and really looking forward to it. Everyone, as you came in, we've given you index cards to try and keep things moving along. As you have questions, go ahead and fill out the index card, put your name on it, and look for John or myself. We'll come around and grab them. And most people have wired or a color card. And then we'll also, the Zoom people will have index cards that we'll pick up from the Zoom people. And that's how we'll handle audience questions. But we're going to start with all the prepared questions, people that emailed questions, some of the leadership teams, some of the different questions that came from clergy. We're going to start with those questions, and then we'll move into the audience in the second half. So we've got a lot to cover. Appreciate everybody being here. And Father Calendar is going to lead us in a short prayer. Thank you.
Let us take a few seconds of silence to remember and honor all those who have done this work before us, the ones who have paved the way to encourage us and strengthen us as we stand on their shoulders to prepare to continue to do this work. Good and gracious God, you invite us to recognize and reverence your divine image and likeness in our neighbor. Enable us to see the reality of racism and free us to challenge and uproot it from our society, our world, and within ourselves. This we pray and say, Amen.
Amen.
All yours.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Rick Hutzell, and I'm a journalist who's covered this community for about 40 years. And I'm currently a columnist for the Baltimore Banner. We're going to start off this evening with some introductions, so I'll just ask the panelists to tell you who they are.
Hello, thank you. I am Maisha Gillins. I am the Executive Director for Equity and Accelerated Student Achievement for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I've been with Anne Arundel County Public Schools since 1997. I have 2 children who attend Anne Arundel County Public Schools, grades 9 and grade 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Coral Snowden. I am a grandfather, native of this particular community. I've even been called an SOB, which is true. I'm the son of a butcher. My father worked at the United States Naval Academy for 30 plus years, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Good evening. I'm the Reverend Canon Chris McLeod. I am a canon for mission and a chief operating officer for the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland, chief operating officer for our Sutton Scholars Program. I'm kind of the interloper. I'm not even from Maryland. I'm from New Jersey. So I'm still learning Maryland, but I know this work. So I'm very glad to be here with you.
Hi, my name is Linda Davis, and I'm a substitute for Janice Williams, who could not make it here tonight. I am a member of several racial justice groups here locally, including Coming to the Table, Showing Up for Racial Justice, the Caucus of African American Leaders, as well as our branch of the NAACP. And I'll be speaking on my behalf as a racial justice activist and trying to do as good of a job as Janice would have done. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I think this is going to go this evening. We'll start with about an hour or so of questions that we have for the panel, and we'll try and spend 5 to 10 minutes on each question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the floor as well as people who are watching from home thanks to Zoom. So we're going to start right off with a basic question, which is, are Anne Arundel County and Annapolis racist places? And has it changed in the last 20 years? And we're just going to start here and move to my left.
Of course, I should have changed seats. Okay. So I'm gonna take the liberty to switch it up just a little bit. The question is, does racism exist in Anne Arundel County and in Annapolis? It does. How do I know this to be true? Our data says this. Our data tells us this. So I'm going to speak specifically to Anne Arundel County Public Schools. When we look at our data by student group, so what does that mean, student group? We're talking gender, we're talking ethnicity, race, students who are differently abled. Our data clearly shows us around racial lines that students of color are not meeting the standards at the same rate as white students. There's nothing wrong with our students. I want to repeat that. There is nothing wrong with our students. It's the conditions in which our students are in that's getting the outcome that we have. So the question about does racism exist? Yes, again, our data shows. There's no reason why our data should show the gaps and the discrepancies that it does. There's no reason for that. So yes, racism definitely exists, is around racial lines. How has it changed? So I can speak for Anne Arundel County, obviously public schools. We are continuously having difficult conversations around what is it that we need to do as employees, as adults, to do something different, to have better outcomes for our students, in particular our students of color. Has there been improvement? Yes. Have conversations shifted and changed? Yes. And I've been in this position for now 5 years. I can even see the difference in the types of conversations. Do we have more work to do? Of course, because we have not eliminated any of our opportunity gaps for our students, again, around racial lines. There's definitely more work to be done. So does racism exist? Our data shows that yes, it does.
First, let me give the audience a homework assignment. If you're really interested in this particular subject, I would recommend strongly that you read an editorial written by Rick Hutzell when he was at the Capitol. It is probably the most profound editorial ever written by the Capitol newspaper, where the Capitol not only documents that racism exists, but it goes a step further. It admits that it was complicit in its racism. I've got to repeat that. It admits that it was complicit in its racism. It's an editorial that's probably the longest editorial that's ever appeared in the Capitol. It was written on June 21st, 2020. If I had my way, I'd make it mandatory that every single school read that editorial. It lays it out so crystal clear. There's no question in my mind that racism exists. But what I'm concerned about is that there's this systemic racism. Very difficult. Systemic racism is that racism that says the following. It's been 366 years before a Black woman was ever appointed to the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court. 366 years before the first Black woman was appointed to the Circuit Court in Anne Arundel County. And to underscore that, it didn't make any difference whether the governor was a conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat. No governor appointed a Black woman for 366 years. The Annapolis Police Department was started in 1875. The first African-American to get appointed to the police department did not happen until March of 1960. And at that time, the editorial of the Capitol said it was their opinion that the city was not ready for Black police officers. But the term they used in those days was Negroes. But these Negroes should be given an opportunity to see if they could meet the task. It was 1960. Anybody think it's an accident or coincidence or happenstance since the beginning of the state of Maryland? We just elected the first African-American governor. Anybody think that African-Americans would run previously were not qualified? So I think history itself speaks to the question of whether race and racism exist. And lastly, I would say this to you. I've shared this with a lot of people. You'd be amazed the number of people who don't know this historic fact. There was a vice president, his name is Richard Mentor Johnson. Richard Mentor Johnson. He was a non-vice president of the United States. He served under a president by the name of Martin Van Buren. When Vice President Harris got elected to the vice presidency, they said, political pundits, that she was the first vice president to bring in a blended family into the White House. Because as some of you know, her husband is white and her stepchildren are white. And many, many people believe that. The truth of the matter is that the first person to bring a blended family into the White House was Richard Mentor Johnson. He ran as the vice president, Martin Van Buren. His wife's name was Julie Chin, C-H-I-N-N. And when Martin Van Buren, who served one term as president, sought re-election, he said to Richard Mentor Johnson, you must disown your Black daughters, we have two of them, and your Black wife. And he refused to disown them. Martin Van Buren lost the election. The vast majority of Americans don't know that history. It's not taught in the curriculum. Well, don't take my word for it. Those of you got your smartphones, just go and Google. Her name was Julie Chin. You'll see what year she served. And you will also find out, if you study it, her daughters were lost to history.
Since I did not spend the majority of my time in Anne Arundel County or Annapolis, I'm gonna share a story. I have two sons who I adopted who are from a group of 5 brothers. One of those brothers was at the Naval Academy and graduated in 2018. Being here and knowing that I was on my way here, he asked us if there was a church that he could go to. It was around the holidays, I can't remember which one. And I gave him the name of a church. And he went to that church, and before he even got through the doors completely, it was recommended to him that maybe he wanted a different church. That was in 2018. That was 5 years ago. So I'm going to say that, yeah, maybe our unconscious, subconscious bias, racism plays in ways that are unsuspecting to us sometimes. Statistically, as Dr. Gillins said, the numbers do not lie. Being part of a high school enrichment program in Baltimore, we understand the same scenarios. There's nothing wrong with our students, but they are not given the resources to succeed. They are not given the equal opportunities to succeed in their schools, but there is nothing wrong with our students.
Thank you. I grew up in Pasadena, Maryland, and in 1966, the year I was born, the Black Panthers asked the country to do something about police brutality in 1966, the year I was born. In Anne Arundel County, we have had problems with police brutality, and the names are Leroy Perry, who was killed by police, Crystal Nelson, who was killed by police, and Deontay Quarles. And I mentioned Deontay Quarles was just in 2020. His mother called because he was having a mental health crisis. In 2020, also, my brother had a mental health crisis in Pasadena, and the police were called, and he walked out of his house in handcuffs and was taken to the ER to get treatment. I just wonder if my brother had been African American, if he would still be alive today. So I believe there is personal racism, which I have, systemic racism, structural racism, and institutional racism, and it is still alive and well in Anne Arundel County, Maryland.
Thank you. How do we get past this? How do we get past this history of racism in this community? Carl, we'll start with you and then we'll come back around.
I think it's important. I think the narrative is important. And I had an experience that I just want to share with the group. And that experience helped me understand something very, very important. It's important for people to tell their own stories and to tell those stories from their perspective. I had the great honor, the great privilege in Annapolis meeting Rosa Parks. When I met Rosa Parks in 1984, she was one of these living legends, national figure. She was in Annapolis for a Black History program. The church was filled, it was First Baptist Church. People wanted to look at this diminutive, small, relatively woman, soft-spoken. And she told her story of being arrested. And she told it in this monotone voice, just above a whisper. And when she finished telling the story of being arrested, a reporter asked her the following question. Mrs. Parks, he said, why were you arrested in 1955? Was it because you refused to give your seat up to a white man? And I will never forget Mrs. Parks' reaction to that question. Mrs. Parks responded, sir, you are wrong. I was not arrested in 1955 for refusing to give up my seat to a white man. I was arrested because I refused to give up my dignity. The person who tells the story is important. If we're ever going to get over this thing we call racism, we have to be honest. We have to listen to those who have been the victims of the system. I talk with my mother all the time. My mother lived to be 104 years old. My mother experienced American apartheid from the day she was born. My mother was born in 1916. Women did not have the right to vote when my mother was born. My mother was a native of this area, lived in a place called Davisonville, Maryland, but eventually moved into Annapolis. And I often think of my mother in the context of race and racism. My mother was like a lot of, I believe, African-American women. She didn't want people to be bitter by certain experiences. She wanted to be better. And so when there were racial incidents that occurred, she tried to protect us from those incidents. Again, I'm one who believes in looking at history. I'm a native Annapolitan. I never knew that a man named John Snowden, no relations to me, was hanged in the city of Annapolis. I lived there all my life. I never knew that a mob of white people took a man named John Snowden down to a place called Calvert Street, where the old jail used to be, broke him out of that jail, I mean, John Snowden was the one that was legally lynched. The man who was working out of jail 11 years before John Snowden was a man named Henry Davis. And Henry Davis was taken to St. John's College. He was hanged from a tree, which, because of his weight, the limbs broke, was shot 100 times. And do you know, to this day, one of the oldest institutions in this country, St. John's College, there's not a single plaque, no reference to that event at all, because people believe if you just erase history, just pretend it didn't happen. So I'm a strong believer that we have to face the truth and deal with it together. It will be uncomfortable, but it must be dealt with.
What Mr. Snowden says is correct. You have it up there, conversation builds community. If we are unwilling to sit down with our truths and crack them open to one another without judgment, we will never be able to learn one another's history. There are certain things that you simply cannot change. We can't change that slavery happened. It happened. It was what it was. Can't change that maybe your family members enslaved our family members. It was what it was. Not looking to change it. We are looking to learn history. If we do not learn our past, we cannot correct the future. Could that have any hope of changing what's in the future? What we do in the church, we tell people, telling your history is the most important thing to do if you are truly interested in breaking through these barriers. It is not comfortable, it is not nice, but when you sit in your own space, recognizing that my lived experiences don't have to be your lived experiences, and your lived experiences don't have to be my lived experiences, and then we can sit in that space and look at it from a perspective of understanding that everyone in this room has a particular bias that we're not always clear about. But to name it to work through it, and then say, I didn't know that, I didn't understand that, that wasn't made clear to me. How do we address the continued barriers when we remain silent? When people begin to craft legislation to criminalize history, all right? Criminalize history, and that is what we are doing. We're saying that our history is so dangerous that we cannot teach it. Oh, I'm sorry. We can only teach a particular type of history. So let's be clear about this. Criminalize history. It is deeply seated, I'm sorry, but I'm going to say it, in the white supremacist ideology that has created most of our institutions in this country. From Christianity, to policing, to judicial matters, legal matters, it is deeply seated. And I want to be very clear. I think really good people are so blinded by their own unconsciousness. They believe that they are doing the right thing. But we largely remain quiet. And when I say we, when we talk about our values, whether they're Christian values, Jewish values, Muslim values, and we decide how we're going to look at our lives politically, we have a group that is so polarized and so dedicated to maintaining a status quo and bringing back a particular part of history in this country. And a group who wants to address it, but has fumbled mightily in talking about how do you criminalize our history. If we do not begin to stand up to this nonsensical position that it is criminal to teach our young people about slavery and the truth about slavery. Again, history is what it was. You can't just decide that you're going to change it to make yourself feel comfortable, but that is what we're allowing legislations to do. And just because it does not happen here in Maryland or in this county, as it spreads throughout our country, it impacts all of us. Silence is complicity. We have to open our mouths, even when our knees shake and our voice tremble.
Thank you. And speaking of voice trembling, that's me. And I am now speaking up, even if my voice shakes, and even if I'm asked at the last minute to speak up. And that wouldn't have been me a few years ago. And I'm very passionate about it, which helps me speak when I feel nervous and shaky. So I believe that silence is complicity, and I'm not going to be silent anymore, and that's part of what we need to do. I have an acronym about what we need to do, and it spells RACE, and we have to have relationships with each other, we have to take action, we have to have conversations, and we have to have education. And those correspond to the 4 pillars of coming to the table, which is a national group. We have a local chapter here in Annapolis. The 4 pillars of coming to the table are facing history, working toward healing, connecting with one another, and taking action. And for me, my ancestors were enslavers, and on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, as well as in New York. And the people who were enslavers in New York, my ancestors were Quakers. So that dispels a lot of myths. The Quakers did enslave people. The North had slavery. And so I believe part of my responsibility is to talk about my history, my ancestry, and also moving it forward, how my family currently benefits from those advantages that my family received, including my father got the GI Bill, many African Americans didn't. My father got a FHA mortgage loan, many African Americans didn't. My great-great-great-grandfather came here from Germany in 1882, and by 1893, he received 40 acres from the Homestead Act. Only 2% of African Americans received that land. He was from Germany, he wasn't even from the US. By 9 years later, he had 40 acres for free. So those advantages have then come down to me, and also the harms. And so because of the harms my family committed, I believe that one of the things we can get over, the hurdles that can help us get over, is reparations. I support reparations, and I think this country needs to have reparations. And of course, there's an act in Congress that's been there since 1933 to study reparations and make recommendations, and it has not passed for 33 years. So we need to, also what you said about banning history, banning African American history. African American history is American history. So we might as well ban American history because it's in our history and it is uncomfortable. And facing that discomfort is transformative. It has transformed me from someone who used to sit on the sidelines to someone who's willing to be on the front lines. And I think that's what we have to do. And Martin Luther King said that he wasn't, in the letter from Birmingham jail, he wasn't as concerned about someone from the KKK. What he's concerned with is the white moderate who remains silent. So we need to speak up, face the truth, tell the truth, and do something about the harms our families have caused.
Like I said, gonna try to contribute some additional actions that can be taken. I'm gonna start with seeing the humanity in people of color in particular. I'll say that again, to see my humanity. Because I can't process how our history has shown how we've treated people, that you cannot possibly see someone's humanity. So you have to see me as human, right? Before we can even start. So that's number one. Number two, we have to acknowledge our own lived experience, right? We have to challenge it. And that's tough. It's like, wait a minute, this is some cognitive dissonance going on, because what I was taught is totally different and against what I thought to be true. Can anyone relate to that? When is that first time in which you experienced something and you're like, I was told a bunch of lies, right? The people loved you, they really did, right? But we were told a bunch of lies. And so we have to reconcile that, right? The people who mean the most to us were feeding us information that dehumanize people, Black people, to be specific. So that's number one. So we definitely have to really continue to do that internal, right, process. Every day I'm always trying to reflect on, okay, I am approaching this, why? What was it about my lived experience is allowing me to react the way I'm reacting? Like, it's a constant reflection. That's work, because we're good and grown, but we have lots of reflection to do. So that's number two. Another thing, do your own homework. Please don't go to Black folks and say, teach me. No, we're not doing that. We're not. It's not my job. And my experience is different, right? We're not a monolith. So please don't do that. And I'm dead serious, that happens a lot, right? Let me call my Black friend or my neighbor and, let's talk about that experience. Of course, if they invite you into that conversation, that's a different story. But do your own homework. There's tons of books. There's so many resources out there. Do your own homework, okay? Another thing I would say is allowing other perspectives to enter into your space. That's hard, because again, what I know to be true is what I know to be true. And allow yourself to lean into some of that discomfort, like, that perspective is way off. But that's how dialogue happens. It's really fascinating to hear how other people think. I truly am a curious person. Be more curious. And don't attach meaning to the curiosity. Do you know what I mean by that? So our brain, we have lazy brains. We want to attach meaning quickly, because we're lazy, it's shortcuts, right? We want to quickly assess the room and attach meaning. And I'm asking you to slow it down. Create speed bumps in your thinking. Slow it down. Stop attaching assumptions to things, because what happens is 9 times out of 10, you're wrong. That's number one, right? And then your actions, how you respond, your impact is gonna oftentimes be negative. So slow your thinking down. Allow other perspectives to enter into your space. I would also challenge us to think about, why am I experiencing discomfort? So some of you may be, your throat may be all itchy, you like, wanting to get this border, you're saying some things that are causing me discomfort. Ask yourself why. Why am I experiencing discomfort right now? What is it that's being said that's causing me this discomfort? It's okay to ask yourself that. And you may not be able to have an answer at this moment. You may think about another week or so. To say there's something about what this conversation, right, has triggered me to have some kind of feeling, and it's okay. Discomfort is, you know why discomfort is important? Because you got feelings, you felt something. Again, that goes back to the humanity in people. You feel something. And I think we've been so desensitized of feeling about someone else's humanity, it's problematic. We should never be desensitized to the data. We should never we should never say, oh, that's the way it is, it always has been, therefore it will be. That's not okay. And I would say lastly, there's so many different approaches. You want to, go to the humanity of people. You want to show empathy. Sometimes that still doesn't work, right? And so sometimes you got to do your approaches. What's in it for you? So I don't know if you all know the work of Some of Us, right? Right, Heather McGee. That's a really good resource. So if you're still not convinced and there's still some humanity things you're still grappling with, or there's no empathy, button in you, read the Some of Us, because it tells you how does this impact all of us, this thing called racism? It does. It impacts all of us. Or Dying of Whiteness, that's another great read, right? So what we're saying isn't resonating with you, I would say, please do your homework. That will be probably my biggest takeaway.
Okay, good answers, good discussion. Let's move on to the subject of hate speech. It has become pervasive on the internet and in social media. Let me ask each of you, has hate speech been normalized? Is it pervasive in this community? And what's its impact on this community? And Reverend McLeod, we'll start with you.
Former President Trump. Has it been normalized? Of course. January 6th. Insurrection of our capital. Has it been normalized? Absolutely. And again, we remain silent around the normalization of hate crimes, hate language, and hate speech. And it amps up at peculiar times, but it amps up, and we allow it to flourish in our newspapers, in our media, radio, TV. We allow it to exist. And again, until we are willing to address it, everything doesn't have to be a club over the head. Sometimes just the simple, are you kidding me right now? Will get somebody's attention. Our fear prohibits us from taking some of the most simplest action that we could possibly take. Generationally, for those of us who are a little bit older, we've always been taught to just sort of, well, as a person of color, you just sort of walk away, right? Because what's the point? I'm not going to waste my energy with that. And the possibility of what happens if you decide to address it. Now, my sons might be a different thing. They're 30 and 28, but they also have learned, I'm going to think about this for a minute. My question to my white brother, what stops you from addressing it? What stops you to not hearing it?
Thank you. So yes, it is pervasive. I Like I said, I grew up in Pasadena, Maryland, and that's been an area where there have been many hate and bias incidents, including in schools, at Chesapeake High School as well as at Severna Park High School here locally. So, and recently there was a noose put in Harford County schools, and we had some problems with that a few years ago here. And so that hate speech is included in those symbols. And I would argue also there are Confederate flags still in Anne Arundel County, and I believe that's a hate symbol. And they are still in this county. And just as an example, Germany will not allow symbols, but this country has continued to allow us to put hate symbols. Thank you.
So my experience with hate speech, I had an opportunity to meet with some students at one of our high schools, and these were white students. And the conversation had to do with this, right? Biased behavior, biased language being used at school. And the students shared with me that definitely it said, and of course my response is, well, what do you all do, right? What do you say back? Yes, peers, what do you say back? And what continues just to hurt my heart is that this peer pressure among young people. We say something, they're like, oh, you can't take a joke. We're just playing around. Or now you're just part of this cancel culture. I can't say nothing around you. Or how about I won't invite you anywhere now. So now you're off my social list, right? And now I can't say these things in the presence of, because they've spoken up. And that scares me, right? That should scare all of us because we're depending on our young people, right? To be that next generation of individuals to be able to speak up and speak out. So here are some things that we definitely try to work on is giving young people scripts, right? So sometimes you're in a situation, you freeze, you don't know what to do. It's either fight, flight, or freeze, right? You don't know what to do. And so some of the conversations we've been having is something called IQEE. When something is said, hate speech, biased language, etc., there are things we can do to help train ourselves to respond. Because again, our young people are put in situations in which sometimes they don't know what to say. Like I said, they are teased or, uninvited now to be a part of the social group. And one of them is called interrupting. Interrupt, that's the I. How do you interrupt something that's being said? Questioning. Tell me a little bit more about what you said. I need to give me more information. Sometimes that catches people off guard because they're not expected to actually have to answer what's coming behind this question. Another one is educate. A lot of educating. Do you understand, do you know the history of this word? Do you know the harm this term or this phrase has? And then something also called echo, E. When individuals are being upstanders, it's always helpful when someone else is now echoing that, right? So now we have 2 or 3 people who are saying, yeah, that wasn't cool. Let's not do that. That's harmful. And so these are the type of things we're working with students. And interestingly enough, now I'm going to do a little plug right here. For the 4 early dismissal days for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, the staff, they engage in equity professional learning. But for students, we call these unity days. And I have to tell you, these are some of the strategies we're doing for students. But do you know how many phone calls I've gotten saying we're indoctrinating our kids? We don't want you, we need to see these lessons because these are the type of things we're trying to help our kids through.
Let me just, I am so happy to have lived during a period of time when I have been able to deal with and experience men and women who address this issue. I want to share a quick story that I think defines not just hate crime, hate speech, but really where we are in America today. Many of you know that Martin Luther King Jr. had a PhD. Many of you may know that in 1963, coming up on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. had given this brilliant speech, I think most people agree, in August of that year. Less than a month later, on September 16th, 1963, 4 little girls were murdered. Went to church, some bigots blew up the church and murdered them. For a lot of people, they couldn't understand how could someone kill innocent children? How? Martin Luther King Jr. would later meet a man named O'Connor. Go back and look at the history of O'Connor, and you will discover that he was the commissioner of public safety in Birmingham, Alabama, where this church had been blown up. Dr. King, PhD, systemic theology, Boston University, had become a national figure by his own right, would meet this man named O'Connor. O'Connor, when you look at his history, you'll discover that O'Connor never completed high school. But O'Connor gave Martin Luther King Jr. a lesson that Dr. King himself said it was both profound and affected him. Dr. King had went to meet with O'Connor, and the idea was reconciliation. How can we move together as a community? And O'Connor, after hearing Dr. King make this plea for racial harmony, simply said to Dr. King these words. He said, Dr. King, it's just a case of mind over matter. It's just a case of mind over matter. We don't mind and you don't matter. The ultimate definition of hate speech. Hate speech isn't just not words you say, it has an intended consequence. You don't matter. We don't mind. Fast forward. I'm a particular appreciate history. Saw this with my own eyes. Not 6 weeks ago, last week. This young Black man, 28 years old, Memphis, Tennessee, place that Dr. King was murdered. He's now elevated and he's now a state representative. You should go back and listen. Listen carefully to the man who's put in a resolution to ouster, to expel Representative Pearson. Condescending and patronizing way he's talking to this man. And what I admire about this young man in Tennessee, he waited patiently. Someone is insulting him, using language that this young man knows he would not use with anybody else. And then it came his turn to speak. I just love this young man. He said to the people in the chambers who had all heard him speak to him in such a disparaging way, I have one question he asked. Who in this chamber would want someone to talk to them like that? Who? Of course, there's complete silence, and then he says the following. It's the decorum, this chamber, the decorum. In this decorum, hate is okay. It's all right to speak to people like this. Not a single member of the majority said to this man, you should not speak to your colleague in such a disparaging way. Not a single member. 2023. Who did believe it? You know, in the Congress, they said, would the gentle lady from California please be recognized? Would the gentleman from Illinois be recognized? That's not what they said to Representative Harrison. So hate crime, I think, or hate language it's part of the fabric of America. And it slips out every now and then. People say things that are just, and they're not even conscious of it. Can you imagine, he as a black man, somebody coming up to me and say, you're gonna stay out of trouble, aren't you? I end with this, because I'm an optimist. It's the only thing that keeps me going. I had this experience, and I like to share it because I think it's the future. I really do. I've got a granddaughter who was going to Annapolis High School. And when she was about 14 or 15 years old, I heard her talking on the telephone. Well, not eavesdropping, she was just talking in a manner that I could hear her. And all of a sudden, I hear her speaking Spanish. And my granddaughter, to my knowledge, didn't take Spanish. So after the conversation was over, I went to my granddaughter, her name is Asada, and said, Asada, I didn't know you took Spanish. I didn't know that was the course you was taking. She said, Granddad, I don't take Spanish. I said, now, Asada, I heard you speaking in Spanish. And she said, oh, no, Granddaddy. She said, I have this Latino friend, and I'm teaching her words in English, and she's teaching me words in Spanish. And we're just exchanging, because we want to be able to communicate with one another. That bright spot came up that moment. Kids, if allowed to just be kids and not be affected by racism, do all kinds of incredible things. And I end on this note. It's one that I would encourage, particularly African-American people, to listen to. It comes from a guy named Dick Gregory. And I love Dick Gregory. He was so insightful. Dick Gregory said, if you walk into a room and somebody say, billionaire, nobody in the room will respond because they know what a billionaire is. They know they're not a billionaire. Go in that same room and say the N-word, and somebody say, who are you talking to? Dick Gregory said, we as a people must not allow that description of who we are to be part of who we are. We should never accept it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to change the format a little bit, and I'm going to ask each of you a question that you'll answer individually, and then we'll come back and we'll do a couple more round robin questions before going to the audience. So I'm going to start with you, Ms. Davis. Can you tell me what you think that local community and business organizations should do to advance diversity and social justice?
Thank you. Well, first, I think they should listen to the panel. And also, there's plenty of groups to join, and people should join groups. And I recommend the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP, connecting the dots, coming to the table, showing up for racial justice, Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, Caucus of African American Leaders, which Carl convenes, the Anne Arundel Connecting Together, the Coalition for Police Accountability, Community Actively Seeking Transparency. So those are some groups that exist, and also the Racial Reconciliation Collaborative. So groups are trying to work on this and have been trying to work on this for a long time. NAACP has existed since 1909. Caucus of African American Leaders has existed for a long time. People have been working on this for a long time, and you need to listen to people who are impacted by the problem. And also, one of the things the Black Panthers said in 1966 was for white people to talk to other white people. So, and organize white people, get white people involved in the movement for racial justice, in the movement for economic justice. Because as Dr. Gillins said in the book For Some of Us, it talks about racism hurting all of us. And it has hurt all of us. It's hurt white people a little less than people of color, but the system has hurt all of us. And so white people, we need to talk to our people and organize white people into the movements and get white people involved. And that includes businesses and local community members.
Thank you. Reverend McLeod, do our religious organizations work hard enough to dismantle racism?
I think that there are some religious organizations that do work very hard to dismantle racism. I think there are other faith organizations that try to work hard, which is different. And I think that there are others who just completely don't address it. As a person of faith, generally we're called to a different standard, a different understanding through the lens of the theology of which we follow, ascribe to, and believe. If we recall the civil rights movement was deeply embedded in the communities of faith. And because of that, there was a particular strength that came from the communities of faith coming together, not just Christianity, but our Jewish brethren, Muslim people, so on and so forth. As Christians, or as a Christian, it's one thing to come from a predominantly African American or Black congregation. As an Episcopalian, being not only a member, but a clergy person of a church that is 93% white, we do work. Some churches work harder than others, some don't. And that's the group of Christianity that I'm most interested in dealing with and talking about. Because my bottom line is this: why are you part of the community if you're not going to ascribe your Christian faith values to this work? The gospel does not change to suit your needs. I have been told plenty of times, you need to stop preaching politics from the pulpit. Oh, maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know what Bible you read, but I know what Bible I read. And if you think that Jesus wasn't political, you might need to go back to Sunday school. Jesus was one of the most political people of his time. The Gospels are political, and that they mirror our society is not a coincidence. This thing called Christian nationalism is not a religion. It is a political movement used as a ploy to unwitting white people who believe that their Christianity is being challenged, when in fact, when you think about religion in this country, particularly Christianity, how do you think Christianity was shaped and formed in this country? Through white supremacist ideology. And if we do not, again, understanding history is so important. How do you think that slavery was substantiated? By using scripture. Ancient slavery is not and was not chattel slavery. They are completely different entities. And the Bible tells you so. That slaves from ancient times had rights for part of the family unit. That's not chattel slavery. But you see, we like to differentiate when it's convenient for us. What I say to my members that I encounter through my anti-racism workshops that we put on and our reparations program is that we have to stop kidding ourselves. You either believe or you don't. You either believe in your baptismal covenant or you don't. There are churches and communities of faith that are working really hard. And there are people within those communities of faith that are working equally hard to dismantle the work that's being done, and be clear about that as well. We have to stop being duplicitous. But the church, the temples, the mosques, we are called to do this work together.
Mr. Snowden, can you talk about whether enough is being done to remove barriers to opportunity for people living at or near the poverty level in our community? And a large percentage of those people are people of color.
The clear answer is not, but let me just give an example of something that all of us experience. And it shows you, when you don't know your history, how all of us get indoctrinated just through ignorance. Last year, the Supreme Court handed down this decision called the Hobbs decision. That decision took away the reproductive rights of women. And we were told by political pundits, we were told by scholars, that's the first time in American history that women had lost the right to reproductive freedom. It's not true. If you go back and read a very famous decision, it's called the Dred Scott decision, written by Chief Roger Chaney, who, as you know, was a Marylander. He wrote this decision that said the following, in essence: Black people have no rights that white people value and respect. That was a Supreme Court decision. And what most people don't understand is what it meant. What it meant was that Black women could be raped, and they were. Black women could be forced to have babies, and they were. Black women had absolutely no recourse under the Supreme Court decision. And yet we're told in 2022, it's the first time women lost the right to vote. Remember what I was saying with Dr. King? It's just a case of mind over matter. We don't mind and you don't matter. In scholars, how can historians, contemporary, not 50 years ago, but right now, tell that lie to all Americans? Run into people who say, oh, first time women lost the right. No, it's not. In the institution, it clearly speaks to the fact that even today, is many years later, people look at Black women and don't think they matter. Nobody seems to I gotta say this, I'm a great feminist. My mother, she taught me so much. One of the things my mother used to always say, and I just see it, it's just full of history, how underappreciated women are. For those of you who didn't come for the purpose of getting a lesson and don't want to do homework, but if someone is watching on live streaming and want to find something that will help raise their consciousness and understand what I'm saying as it relates to this moment. There's an old movie. Some people in this room may be old enough to remember it, others may be hearing it for the first time. But when you go home, just Google Imitation of Life. Imitation of Life is a movie that it was put out. It was absolutely prohibited from being seen in the South. But there's one scene in the movie that I want to take a moment, Rick, to lift up. I think it goes to the whole point here. What are we going to do? This woman had a relationship, this Black woman had a relationship with her employer. And there come a time in the movie where this relationship had reached this point where this Black woman was dying. And this white woman who cared for her tremendously. As she laid on the deathbed, the Black woman started telling the white woman things she wanted to do. A couple of things she had indicated was that she wanted to give some money to somebody that she's been doing over the years. And the white woman didn't know she had been given this money. And then finally she said to her, and I also want you to contact this group I've been affiliated with. And she gives her the name of the group. The white woman says to her, I've known you all these many years. I never knew that you were interested in these things. And the black woman responded on the deathbed, never asked me. You never thought to ask me. I've got children and grandchildren. You never asked me about it. I've got dreams and ambitions. You've never asked. So I think in part, the dialogue must be one of honesty. It must be one of people being willing to learn true and accurate history. How many of you know that in here in Anne Arundel County, in 2009, here in Anne Arundel County, the book by Maya Angelou, I Know Why Cage Birds Sing, was banned. Most of you probably haven't heard of it. Give you one other example, then I think I've made my point. If you were to Google, the city of Philadelphia apologizes to Black people, you would discover two things. One, that apology was given last October. And when you Google it, you will ask yourself, how did I miss this? So they brought it up. And what did they apologize for? Here's what they apologized for. From 1950 up until the late 70s, the University of Pennsylvania experimented on Black people who were illiterate, did all kinds of horrible experimentation on it. It was unethical, illegal, etc. Horrible. When it came to light, the courts decided that the statute of limitations run out. Anybody who knows anything about law knows that there's no statute of limitation on murder. But people interpret it, but it had run out. This happened last year in October. And the vast majority of people in this room I know have never heard of it. Just as what I'm about to say. Right here in Anne Arundel County, in a place called Crownsville State Hospital, Black people were experimented on. They're literally unmarked graves with numbers on them. Not names, but numbers. And people who live in this county, some who read this story, it's been published in the Capital newspaper. Nobody picked up. Nobody called their delegate or their state senator. So what are you doing with this? How are we compensating these people who lost loved ones? Experimentations that were done. When Martin O'Malley was governor, considered to be a liberal, this issue was brought to his attention, swept it under the rug. When Hogan became governor, considered to be a conservative or moderate, this issue was raised, swept under the rug. You know I'm curious to see what happens when Westmore gets this.
Let me come, before we pass the mic on, let me see if I can get you to address the question. Those are really good statements. But what more can be done to help people who are below the poverty line come up so there's some kind of economic justice?
There is a magnificent speech by Martin Luther King Jr. I'm a big fan of Dr. King. It's given in 1967, 1 year before Dr. King is murdered. If you Google the speech, it's called, Where Do We Go From Here? And in 1967, Dr. King advocated something that I think is as true today as it was in 1967. Dr. King said the way to solve the systemic problem of poverty is to create guaranteed annual income, where this government would say nobody who lives in America will fall below a certain income level. And one of the things I've long advocated, just wish I was in a position to have implemented it. I met with Barbara Mikulski when she was a member of the United States Senate. We had public housing here in the city of Annapolis. And I like to tell people this. When you tell people about public housing in the city of Annapolis, they have this image of public housing. Generally, it has names like Robinwood, Bywater, Newtown 20, names like that. But really, what public housing is any housing that is subsidized by the taxpayers. And the best public housing that exists in the city of Annapolis is the Naval Academy, 6,000 midshipmen living in public housing. And there's another place recently that somebody moved in, it's called the Governor's Mansion. Those public housing units don't seem to have the same problem as conventional public housing. I do know that there's some crime going on in those units. And every now and then somebody gets busted for something, but generally it's considered, what's the difference between that housing and public housing, conventional public housing? This is what I maintain the difference is. If you are going to the State House, if you are lucky, you get 2 terms, which is 8 years. You have to leave, it's mandatory, you gotta go. Go to the United States Naval Academy, they're a little more generous. You can do it in 4, but if you need to do 5, they give you 5. But in each one of those instances, when you go into those public housing, you have to have a plan to exit. People who live in the Governor's Mansion, people who live at the Naval Academy are not tenants, they're stewards. And a steward knows that his or her responsibility is to maintain the property for others that will come. I suggest that one of the things we need to do is rethink how we use conventional public housing. Give people who live in public housing an opportunity to get out. Everybody I know how to get in public housing, but very few know how to get out of public housing. And I suggest that if we really want to address poverty, we need to take the approach working with families that live in public housing and develop plans. How do you leave public housing? And by the way, we do have some stories of people who lived in public housing and went on to do some magnificent things, but they're the exception, not the rule. And I think that there are things that we can do. And lastly, is something I want to share that I thought that President Biden made a great suggestion. We have, through this infrastructure, there are going to be billions of dollars spent in infrastructure. If we target those neighborhoods that are crumbling, that really have to have this economic infusion, and then focus on making sure that the people who are affected in those neighborhoods are the ones who we train the jobs for, who we help them get a step up on economic ladder, we can make a difference. And we can do it in 2 generations. Just 2 generations. And so I think we need a more concerted focus effort on empowering people to be economically independent.
Thank you. Dr. Gillins, can you talk about whether schools are leading, following, or obstructing the pursuit of racial and social justice? And by schools, I mean Anne Arundel County schools. And thanks for getting your own mic.
Right, we're trying, I'm sorry, I was trying to do my, which one? Can you repeat your question? Thank you.
How are Anne Arundel County schools leading, following, or obstructing the pursuit of racial and social justice?
Loaded question, lots of layers.
That's gone.
The best kind, alrighty. So here are the areas in which we are leading the work in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And I know this because when I'm out talking with other school districts and I let them know what's happening in Anne Arundel County around equity, folks are like, oh, wow, we don't do that. And so one of the things that I had already mentioned, for example, are the 4 equity early dismissal days. You will not find that in other districts where the school system, students leave, right, they go home and staff are, it's mandatory for them to stay behind, of course, unless you have to sit there, doctor's appointment, but it is an expectation for them 3 hours 4 times a year to engage in equity work. Again, if you were to ask folks in other districts, that is unheard of. So we're certainly leading the way in how we have our calendar scheduled to allow for this type of professional learning. Other things we also have in Anne Arundel County, we do have policies around the work of equity. We have an educational equity policy that did come through MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, in which districts had to adopt and pass an equity policy. We do have that. We have a workforce diversity policy. We have other policies that do support the work around diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a safe and supportive schools for LGBTQ+ students policy. We were one of the first to even have transgender guidelines. It's been maybe 5 or 6 years now, even before it became policy. So certainly we're leading the way. We also have opportunities for student voice. It's a group called Let's Talk Justice. If you go on the Anne Arundel County Public Schools website, you'll find them where they've done forums, public forums around topics of racism and athletics. They talk about women's rights, for instance, something that they spoke about and we actually have is student products being available, easily available in restrooms. We now have that. So students, they will tell you what they need, let me tell you. And as adults, it's our responsibility to listen and do something about it. We also new this year is a student equity advisory team. And so if you all had the opportunity to do any of the listening and learning tours with Dr. Bedell, the students who presented him were part of the student equity advisory team. And these are our middle schools and high schools. And we bring them together. So again, we can hear from them through a lens of equity. What's happening? What is their experience as a student that we can do differently and I can advocate for? One of the things that, as far as my position, where do I fall in the organizational chart in Anne Arundel County Public Schools? I think it's important for folks to know. I'm part of the superintendent's cabinet. So I do have an opportunity to be in the presence of the superintendent and to give voice to hear the things that we know are happening in our schools. Now, our superintendent is very data driven. He's very attuned on his own, so he does not need me to share information for him because he's really an amazing, his leadership, right, is being very, very data driven. So here are some challenges. Anytime you have a conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, you're gonna have people that are gonna push back for lots of different reasons. A, I don't believe in it. B, I don't see the humanity in folks. C, it had nothing to do with me, right? This has got to do with me, so therefore, why are we even having this conversation? And of course, you have folks who are in it, rolling their sleeves up, willing to take action and do something. These folks, I mean, if we're gonna be honest, I mean, we are a large school district, right? We're very diverse in experiences, belief systems. However, what I can say about the school system is when I talk about those policies, we do have policies, right? So if, for instance, if an employee is violating one of our policies, then that we do have things that we can do to ensure that we do have employees that are adapting all the policies that we have in place. What else to add to that? I had my thoughts and I've lost it. I apologize. I normally don't get a loss of words. I'm sorry. But I think I've given you the gist of this is a wide range of things we're doing really, really well. And clearly from what I mentioned earlier with our data, we have lots of work to do.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to questions from the audience. And if we have time, we'll come back for a wrap up with the panel. The first one, I think that Reverend Callender is going to read one.
I'm actually gonna read this and step away.
Okay.
Just want you all to know this is from Ebola Peters. Start with the RRC. Following up on Dr. Gillins' comments, what are some strategies that our communities and churches should facilitate to involve more young people in these discussions regarding racial reconciliation?
So what can the community do to help engage our young people?
Yes.
Well, definitely support. A lot of times our young people want to participate in these things, and then sometimes we have families who are like, "Oh, you're not going to be part of, say, GFA, right? Clubs. Any clubs that are supportive in particular allies to students who identify as LGBTQ plus. So definitely the community has to rally around our young people in order to create spaces in which they're growing and advocating for. Ask your students, what clubs are happening in your school? Our schools, we do offer a variety of opportunities. I would just say support, and ask a lot of questions, do a lot of talking. The best time to talk to young people when you're driving in the car, they can't hop out. And they gotta take the earbuds out, right? And so the big thing is, how was your day today? Tell me 3 things. Try to avoid the yes, no, right? Something more open-ended, really is responses. I would just say support them. There are gonna be things, I'm telling you. Oh, and your response to them matters, your feedback matters. Young people, they know a lot. Work very home, you share some things with me, and I literally had to respect, I had to check my response. Because I want to be your first teacher, right? I want to be your first teacher. But they're curious, and they're gonna ask questions, and sometimes they may outpace us. Our children may outpace us. Of saying no. Otherwise, keep the conversation going. That's what I think that's my biggest takeaway, is to really engage with our young people.
Okay. We had some questions submitted by people who are interested in having before this. So I'm going to go through a couple of those, and then we'll go to the audience. So let me ask the panel, how do you see the concept of reparations in this discussion? And why don't we start with you, Reverend?
Say the question again for me, please.
How do you see the concept of reparations in this discussion?
I think reparations is very important. I think people need to understand reparations instead of having knee-jerk reactions to the word reparations. We need to understand that reparations is not about white people handing black people money or giving them a blank check. Reparations starts as simple as an apology. You realize that this country has never apologized for the sin of slavery. Congress did it, representatives did it, a couple of presidents did it. But collectively, there has never been an apology to the African American community around the act of reparations. That is the start of reparative work. That is reparations. How do you repair that which is broken? Well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that it was broken. And if we continue to criminalize history, well, that's a big evidence of reparation. An apology. How do we start there? How about we look at why there is so much economic disparity? How the reasons why. There's not enough money to go around. That is the greatest lie that we love to ourselves. The greatest lie. Reparations have been given to almost every other group. Reparations were given to former plantation owners who lost their property. You go right to Washington, D.C. When the slavery ended, they were given reparations. Jewish people have been given reparations. German people have been given reparations. Indians, Native Americans have been given a form of reparations. So HR 40, which has been floating around for the 34 years, it got a little bit of steam a few years ago. I want you to understand what HR 40 actually is. To establish a commission to study. For 34 years, we have been not able to pass the bill to establish a commission to stop. Reparations would be our government acknowledging that we have gone. Reparations includes a lot of things, but includes the thing that matters the most: acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the sin of slavery. Acknowledgement of the sin of slavery that has lived on and on. For Jim Crow, Black coups, lynching. That's reparations. That's the start of it. Don't believe the rhetoric that you hear. For us in the church, reparations is not a political conversation. Reparations is biblical. It is grounded in scripture. And so that is where we need to start our personal opinion.
Ms. Davis, let me ask you, you grew up in this community. Where have you seen race relations in the community?
That's a good question. I was going to answer the other question. I did want to add discussion. Dr. David Ray and Melinda Salazar, the co-founders of the Youth Health, said reparations is the midpoint of truth and reconciliation. To reconciliation, we need reparations. I believe in personal partial reparations that we can acknowledge. So the question was about where racial harmony.
Where have you seen race relations?
I don't think I have. I haven't seen it improve.
I think you could look at some things, as I mentioned earlier. You know, first time, Nika Henson is serving the seat that once was occupied by Mike Bush. She got elected. I think the election of a number of people, including the judge I mentioned earlier, Judge Morris, as an example. Things I want to share. I think where the tragedy took place here in Annapolis. It's not a tragedy that's unlike other tragedies around the country. It's always interesting how it's worth it. I knew Rick Williams in his capacity as editor of the Capitol. And because I've been around doing all kinds of different things over my career, some people don't even realize I once worked with. That's another story. So I knew her in another capacity. This is 2018. Some people I knew in Norway were murdered at the Capitol Gazette. And people who had worked with, particularly Wendy Winters, but others, were affected by her death. So this one particular woman was mentioned to them, a member of the caucus of African American leaders, responded to this tragedy by saying, we should do something. So at a meeting of the caucus of African American leaders, predominantly Black, we voted to build a memorial to the victims. And to the larger principle, something called the Guardians of the Freedom First Amendment. I will never forget this lady, rather be white, walked up to me and she said, Mr. Snowden, none of the people were black. I don't want to Why do you? So 20. Her question was full of sincerity. She had no understanding or appreciation that a people who suffer some incredible atrocities finding their ability to be able to empathize with other people. I thought of that question. I thought of the moment we in there. Remember the guy I was taking from Tennessee? Black guy, Janice. He was protesting gun violence. With 3 white children 9 years old. And he was just saying, we gotta do something with this gun violence. It didn't matter that they happened to be. He had friends who were black who had died by gun violence, but in this case, the mother that he happened to know with his constituents was white, lost his son Noah. I really do think that they most of us superficial. They're symbolic. When you see a Westmore, there's great pride. It's a sign of pride. You see African Americans get elected to various positions that they've never been elected for. It's foolish to deny as a form of progress. I strongly urge people who've not heard it, go back and listen to Dr. King's speech. It sounds like he's talking about 2023. He said that we've come to a point in America where now 67. What kind of America do we want, he says? We've got a choice in terms of the America we're going to have. In 2040, demographics remain the trend they're doing. America is going to be majority people come. 2040, what's wrong with that? In Annapolis, African Americans who used to be the largest minority in the city are now second. Latinos. For those of you who know the Annapolis area, if you go to Tower Heights Elementary School, or you go to Mills, Elementary School, they're predominantly Latino. That's going to change the way of the community. I have a neighbor who I live next to, who was so incensed when Latinos started moving in the neighborhood that I live in. And he was particularly angry because this particular Latino who lived across the street from us kept his yard back. Prior to that, this Ray took great pleasure in saying, I got the best looking yard. Same things, I bet you he's stealing from the league teams. He's stealing it. So people continue to move into the change, they will change to make it up. He said, I'm done. Too many moving in. It's changing the character of this community. I'm moving. Going to my daughter. Leaving Annapolis. So I said, all right, where are you going? I'm going to Texas. Oh, my. I think that there have been improvements. I mentioned my granddaughter, and I just want to say one last improvements in terms of the country. The United States Naval Academy is one of the oldest institutions. They just here in Annapolis. And it took us years to get the United States Naval Academy to agree to host Martin Luther King Jr. There are a lot of reasons for not doing it. But they finally agreed to it, and they discovered something. It was, the world didn't stop, the world didn't come to an end, they moved on, and they themselves found by getting involved, they made the institution better. And by nature, I'm an optimist. I have to be. My mother is still better than me. Joey comes in the morning, you mentioned religious peace. My mother, when she was 8 years old, used to say to me, "So, Mama, how you doing?" Call her on the phone. She, "I woke up this morning, it's a blessing." I didn't know what that meant, but I know now. So I think as long as we wake up, blessing, because it gives us each an opportunity to work better. And I just want to share this quick story. Mark, after works with us with Mark King Jr. It's a famous photograph, and I tell him all the time, he should be so proud of that. Mark Adams' father, King Jr. He's got this incredible photograph, and his father's name was David. And David after is standing next to him. And I wondered, what must have had that opportunity to speak to Dr. King. And long before I knew Mark, I now know the value of meeting a president, like a Scott King, or the case of Rosa Parks. I'm in my engine. When her book was banned here, she came to Annapolis. I gotta just say this for my age. I've never met anybody with the kind of humanity that she has. What an incredibly wise. For me, very inspiring. And my angel told me during an interview I read from a radio station, and I asked my what's the greatest book that she ever wrote? She has not been written yet. She said, "You just keep living in life. You find that it's an achievement. It's not the zenith. That's the apex." So I'm confident that in America, we've not reached the apex. And even with Donald Trump, who just sued somebody for $500 million, like $500 million, what a justice.
Okay, let's see if we can get a couple questions in from the audience. Anyone? Yep.
Sorry. This one probably for Dr. Gillins.
So is love being in Anne Arundel Case Schools? What is the procedure for getting a book into the school curriculum?
Yeah.
That's a great game.
Yeah, so that would be a different office, the curriculum and instruction office. So whoever is asking the question, you want to stay back behind with me, I can give you, we can exchange information. There's a process, curriculum, tests, et cetera. Yes, my office doesn't oversee the curriculum. But if you stay behind, we can exchange information, so I can steer you in the right direction.
Well,
Name? Rob, excuse me, I'm sorry. Some people claim that CRT is indoctrinating, causing our young people to hate each other.
it's an education issue. I think it's you.
Oh, no, okay.
I'm so sick of CRT. That was never intended to be where it's at. And that's what happens when the devil is at work. They're searching for things. CRT was a graduate level program that was intended for graduate students to do research and to learn something specific
It was never intended to be part of anyone's quote unquote curriculum. Someone heard someone talk about it and said, that's the way. Dr. Gillins said it a little bit earlier, we're kind of lazy, our brains are kind of lazy. We live our life on soundbites. That CRT soundbite is around so much that we believe it. It's a real thing, and it is a real thing in academia. That is the only place that CRT exists. How we get all of this other stuff under it is by manipulation. It's simply manipulation. When someone says to you, they're indoctrinating our children. Oh, you mean they're teaching them? That's CRT, that's not CRT. Not one person, I can guarantee you, who knows about CRT has ever even read what the CRT program for graduate level students and a very small group of graduate level students know about.
The comment is coming from governors, states, Florida, Texas. Their governors saying we're indoctrinating children. And I think they take it way beyond it. They take it to anything it has to do with history. You don't want our kids to know about it because it makes future. It's not true.
Because everything has been politicized. Speak up. But young people.
Yes.
So the thing is that you have a supermajority and you're living your life through a political lens. Okay? Shame on people. You know, we can have different outlooks. We can have, you know, you want to be a Republican, you want to be Democratic, that's really not what we should boil ourselves down to. Just simply because you have a super majority, people in those Republican parties that have not gone well, and CRT is not. So how do we get it to stop? Well, thank goodness we don't live in Florida. Thank goodness we don't live in those other 29 states trying to affect their legislation. If it ever happens here, that's where we need your voices. In the state rights or state have a lot of power in their states. But we need to address this outright and we need to correct people.
Okay, how do we create educational programs that utilize local institutions, histories of racial injustice, like the Crownsville Mental Hospital, Crownsville Hospital Center, to convey a sense of hope for a brighter future given our very troubled past?
I actually have hopes for something, and this is a great audience in which to do it since it's a audience. There are things that I think with all due respect to the county public schools system, like we wait for just the way it goes. So what I'm telling people is we should create what's called Saturday schools. Just as a way of Sunday school, religious teachings. Saturday schools can be designed with a number of things. One, we can have economic discussions. Also, we can stand in our own experiences and just share experiences. You know, we've had some incredible people who come through this city. We've made a tremendous contribution. There's a guy that I want to push for guys to. It may one day be in Anne Arundel County, but it won't be anytime soon. It's called the Duke of York. Duke of York. It's written by a lawyer who's white, who's from all over the world. And the guy who wrote this literally spent his life doing research. And he wanted to leave something to share with people. For example, I never knew in New York City, New York State, named after the Duke of York. I didn't know who the Duke of York was. It turns out the Duke of York had a daughter. Her name was Princess Anne. who later became Anne. And guess what now? I found out from reading his book, The Duke of York, that they made their money. That would be good. I began to say, whoa, what else did I know? I noticed there are streets that's named after people, there are bridges that's named after people. And as I began to do some research and ask questions, it's amazing. To the credit of Anne Arundel County Public Schools, here's something, Board of Education. This one, shine a light on something. For those of you who are not native Annapolitans, you will not know necessarily, not from Anne Arundel County, that we had a segregated school system that went from the 1900s all the way up to 1966. We had a school called Wally H. Bates, where if you were Black, no matter where you lived in Anne Arundel County, you had to go to that particular school. So people started doing some research, discovered there's a woman named, she was a Black supervisor, called the school supervisor. And her job was during this segregated time to kind of look over the schools. And she had to get approved. Anything she George Fox was the superintendent of schools at that time. A young man named Walter Mills. Walter Mills worked in the Anne Arundel County public school system. And he ought to be considered a hero. I know teachers that go to Anne Arundel County, teachers who teach at Anne Arundel County, don't have any idea who he is. Or need in schools. Walter Mills was one of the few men who challenged the school system in 1933, when white people, pay was different than Black people. You could have as he did, you could have a master's degree, a PhD, or you could be white with a high school degree. You would get more money if you were white than these Blacks on paper, credentials, more. So it was Walter Mills who challenged the system. He had a great lawyer, by the way. His name was Thurgood Marshall. And George Fox said publicly that the worst white teacher is better than any Black teacher. He said publicly to the superintendent of schools. Fast forward, start doing this history. Should we have a school named after George Fox? There used to be a school called George Fox Middle School. People begin to look at that history and say what institutions do is reflect. Look at any institution, look at the kind of statutes that go up that reflects what you want. So thanks to the push for the community, that school changed its name. Roger Taney's statue has been on 50 years at the State House. It didn't come down by accident. It came because as more people became aware of that he often Dred Scott decision, went up. And one of the things that those who pay attention are going to do this on Monday. And let me put this plug in for those who are watching in the audience. We're going to be dedicating a plaque this coming Monday. And some of you heard, his name is Jeffrey Henderson. He's a product of this community. He went to Egypt, more than 20 plus times, made a tremendous contribution. We believe that people like you forgot. So, city to agree, put up a memorial on this young man, guy, age of 73. People do not forget. And so these Saturday schools is a way of taking local, some of you've never heard. Janice Williams was here, she can tell you that Annapolis 5, who are the women, who are the 5 people. Who are not teenagers, Annapolis demonstration was unlike any other demonstration. It's in the 60s, people in this community, Annapolis, 5 people who protested, all adults and all professionals. 2 of them work for the public school system. Can you imagine that? 1960, challenging the system while being employed. So that's the kind of history that I think we need to record. The schools is where to go. is the way to go.
Okay, and with that, we are out of time. So I appreciate it. I'm sorry if we didn't get to any questions. I'm sorry, the guy asked me to wrap up quickly on one question. I'm sorry we didn't give you more time. So with that, thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn it back over to.
Well, I'm gonna thank the panel. Obviously, we're just, there's a lot more to unpack, a lot more to think about. So Carl Snowden gave us some homework to do. He gave me a month ago some books to look at, and I would say definitely take him at his word. Read, look for that editorial in the Capital, June 2020.
That's okay. Now bring it to you. All up. That's such an important episode. I like to share it.
The other thing, I want to share with everybody here, the RRC started is a group of seniors, most people come together. We've been a lot of churches, but my personal journey, 61 years old, and pretty much all my life, I knew racism was wrong, racism was wrong. I think we all know it. That first step, putting yourself out there, making a change, that first step is the hardest step. I was on the sideline for 59 of my 61 years. It's really hard, but once you take that first step, that's the hardest step. After that, your heart's going to lead you. And you're going to know you're doing the right thing, and you'll keep pushing, you'll keep getting involved. What I'd like to ask everybody here to do, Carl gave your homework, I'm going to do this. Give it a few days, let this all sink in, digest it, and then call your friends and talk to them about it. We just need to reach out a little bit at a time. This isn't going to change overnight. Find a few friends, talk to them, have them come to the next speaker series, have them come to community conversations. Coke Room from the Annapolis friend, some of the St. Louis members. We'll talk a little bit tonight. We're going to start this community conversations program, and I'm sure a lot of the issues that we're discussing come up. Surveys. Part of the reason I got into this was my family spent 5 years doing Black Saga program. Black Saga was a study of African American history. Our elementary school sponsored it, really promoted it, and there's 1,500 questions on African American history. It's a deep dive. And once you get into it, you realize there are amazing stories, things that you never knew about. And studying that with my son, and with other families that were doing this amazing experience, we're working through RRC to help Black Saga back into Northern County schools. And the founder of Black Saga is with us. There's a table back here talking about that. Other people are working on this year seminars about the language of anti-racism. There are certain terms, understanding how those terms are used and what they mean is really important, because there's and you don't always understand what those terms mean. So that's a Zoom review, and we're also going to continue with the speaker series. We have Andrew Hanauer from Moderator County, and he's going to talk about toxic polarization. And probably the follow-up to that is going to be something specifically is addressing hate issues. Again, we have to thank you for coming. Thank you for being interested, and I just urge everyone, take that first step. You won't regret friends and try to make it. Again, for the panel, yes, Francis, sitting on the panel. We really want to thank the panel. They were great volunteers for them. Great idea, the moderators. I appreciate that. And all of you, person. It's been a great night. I invite you to stick around, have some drinks, some snacks, and talk to the people in different programs.
One more event.
one more event we want to tell you about in the fall. We're gonna have a fun fair on these topics. It's gonna be something a little bit lighter than what we're doing today. The intent is to have other groups working in this space inside here, be able to go around and find out what's going on in Annapolis, how you can get involved with the whole organization. You also something that touches your heart, whatever it may be, because there's lots of people doing good work around here. We just need to amplify that. That's what we're trying to do with this vision. Outside, we're gonna have fun. And we're gonna be doing, reads and doing.
The RRC. Will be plenty of information in the newsletter about it. And so we'd like to present every one of our panelists with a banner.
This book is he wrote a book on the subject about his experiences in life. And he's a colonel in the army. She gave it to me so that I can share it with you all. So our analysts, so it's called A Call to Share. Thank you, Bolden. Thank you to your brother-in-law. It's out there on Zoom, by the way.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.